He's right. Maybe we should separate labs out into female scientists and male scientists. That seems to be what you're saying.
It's important for women to be able to compete in a male environment, but it's important to help those women, to support those women in terms of confidence and in terms of self-belief, because women are more naturally self-reflected. Again, not all women, a lot of men are like this too.
It's sort of a weird sexist position to take, isn't it? So women can't really take it, so we need to be extra specially careful around them. And we
It's different for gay men and lesbian women?
Well, it's brilliant being a gay man because you can get away with murder. You can do anything. I mean, there's the one respect in which identity politics is brilliant. You know, as a gay man or a lesbian, you can basically get away with murder. You can be bitchy, you can be sarcastic, you can be rude and abusive, and you can do whatever the hell you like, and nobody complains. Women, I think, really, you know, until very recently, until possibly the last half decade, it was certainly true that women had all kinds of structural disadvantages in society. That simply isn't true anymore. It's not true, for example, when women go for jobs in science, technology and mathematics. You know, a study came out, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago in the US saying that women have a 2-to-1 advantage over men with the same qualifications because everyone's so desperate to hire women. The reality that people experience, you know, going for jobs and in the working life is actually that women are sort of structurally advantaged, not disadvantaged.
And that's happened
very recently.
Also to show that out of 65 countries, the UK has the highest discrepancy between confidence amongst boys and girls in terms of how good they feel that they are. Girls are coming out of school and not going into those careers because they feel they're not good enough, they feel they're not welcomed.
But women are in the majority at university.
Those very skills, those very qualities that, yes, women do cry, some women cry. I have cried when I've felt out of my comfort zone, when I have felt afraid, but actually that didn't make me any less good. I cried when I came out of all my exams at Cambridge and I did better than the boys. And actually women cry because they're sensitive. Again, not all women, some women, lots of men too, because they're sensitive, because they're self-reflective, because they're empathic, because they're passionate, and they're willing to take on criticism, they're willing to look at themselves. Excuse me?
So Tim Hunt's right.
He's right that women cry, but the implication that that makes us at a disadvantage, that puts us in as people who shouldn't be going into...
I don't think he made that implication. What he was saying is that he finds...
to make that kind of comment in an environment when
he never said that makes women less
competent.
What he said was he finds it personally a distraction. He said that he finds it a distraction in
science. Rather than women.
And he's a silly old man who doesn't understand the latest, you know,
but he
the latest sort of feminist politics on this.
What
is he? 73 years old?
We can't expect him.
Right. We can't expect him to be up on the, you know, all of that kind of stuff.
He's in a position of responsibility.
What we're witnessing really is a comment that would be perfectly unobjectionable if it were over the dinner table, or if it was, for example, your own granddad.
It wouldn't be unobjectionable if there were young girls present who were studying maths and science at school. And
Andrew Short has tweeted to say, is it because he's made these comments because, leaning to your point, because he's a septuagenarian and he's from a bygone era, sexism in the modern world has no place, but he is an old man, and so do we have to forgive him?
Of course, I'm not talking about him and his comments as him as a person. I'm talking about what it does in terms of the environment that we're bringing girls up into, and a responsibility that people in positions of authority like he is to actually not perpetuate these negative images about women. It's really damaging when girls do a maths test in an environment where they've been told that they're not going to be as good as girls. If they do a maths test in that environment and they identify themselves as girls, they actually write their name as female on the test, they won't do as well in that environment.
Yeah, but you see, you're conflating two different things. You know, it is true that teachers in general mark boys down, but it's true that in STEM subjects they mark boys up. When you sort of do the blind tests, you know, when teachers know the gender of the person who's studying, boys get marked up in the sciences.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the stereotype threat, which is when girls identify themselves as being female by writing their own name on the top of the test, they will do worse. It has been shown that they will do worse because they know that they feel that they will probably fail.
Better at university. More girls are going. Well, okay, so we have to ask.
Girls perform better at university.
You have to ask if this is really a problem. More women are going to university. They're getting higher grades at school. They're getting higher grades at university.
20% of all
more women graduate. Women in their 30s earn more than men for the same work in their 30s in the UK and the US now. They are 2-to-1 more likely to get a job with the same qualifications. Where's the structural bias against women here? I don't see the problem here. What I do see, actually, is a very reasonable complaint from a lot of young men, not my generation maybe, you know, I'm sort of 10 years older than them, but from a lot of young men who are going to university, going into the workplace, and they don't recognise the world you're describing, because it's not their experience. When they go for a job, they are discriminated against because people are desperate to hire women. When they go to university, more women are doing better all around them, and they feel as though being held up to feminine standards of behaviour, being whacked on Ritalin because they're too boisterous, boisterous in the playground or not getting the same support that women do at university, that
okay, and what about mental health issues that men have?
Would you like to make a final point, and then I'll come to you?
Of all A-level physics students, only 20% are girls. How can you possibly say that we're in an equal environment where girls are coming out and studying science as much as boys are? We are absolutely not, and we need to make sure that girls feel that science is for them and it's not just for boys, and they're not being pushed out of it because of who they are and because they might cry and because they might be self-reflective.
But this is based on an assumption that there ought to be some kind of gender parity. My suggestion is that there isn't. We don't complain when women dominate subjects like nursing. We shouldn't complain when men dominate subjects like physics.
We're going to have to leave it there. We could chat for another hour on this. Milo, Doctor, thank you both very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News. We'll continue this discussion on Twitter. Women should not be in a science lab because they cry and fall in love, says a septuagenarian biochemist. What do you think? You can find out what my guests think on Twitter as well. Dr. Emily Grossman at Nero. Send us your thoughts at Kay Bowley if you would like to. We've got all today's top stories.
Well, and the brave man, Milo Yian, is here with us now. Are we expected to feel sorry for men? Is that what this is?
I think it would have been ridiculous until really very recently for any man to make arguments like this. It's certainly ridiculous for anybody of even my generation. But I think with some justification, young men, particularly of 20, do go through life and they don't recognise the world that, for example, feminist campaigners describe. They do experience discrimination in education. They do feel as though schools can be architected against them sometimes. They get whacked on Ritalin for being too boisterous. When they get into the workplace and go and apply for jobs and all the rest of it, they don't have all the same sort of programmes and foundations and extra schemes and all the rest of it. Yes, it would be ridiculous to have made this argument even perhaps half a decade ago, but I don't think it is anymore.
Right, but your main claim is about the gender pay gap, that actually that is a myth. And it's not a myth, is it?
Yes, it is a myth, yes.
Well, it's not a myth according to the figures from the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, because even in November last year, they showed that the gender pay gap for all employees, full-time and part-time, still benefits men by 19.1%. That's their figures.
Yes. Well,
for full-time employment, just one moment, it was 9.4% less, and that's in April this year. Now, there is a narrow figure that they used too, which shows that hourly earnings in April 2014, with women working for more than 30 hours a week, were actually paid 1.1% more. But that's right. It's just that bracket. And actually, when you get men and women workers in their 40s, 50s or 60s, again, the gender pay gap is in favour of men. So it's a myth.
Well, you're right about all of that stuff, but you're wrong about why it's happening.
Well, hang on a second, though, because you made the claim in your piece, in your film, that women are not paid, or rather men are not paid more than women, and they are.
Well, you have to understand where the figures come from, right? These figures...
you must understand.
These figures are... You're going to accuse me of mansplaining, aren't you? No. These figures come from averages across society. They don't take into account the different life choices that women make. The reality is that women do prefer a more balanced life. When they go to work, even if they don't have babies, they take longer holidays. They tend to take more holidays. The reason that they are paid more, up to about 30, 35, 39, depending on whose figures you believe. The reason that flips
only between 30 and 39.
No, that's actually not true. The reason that the figures flip after that age is because women make different life choices.
Right.
And if you take those life choices into account, no serious economist believes this stuff. It's repeated by politicians right up to President Obama, but no serious economist takes the wage gap seriously.
Caroline.
Well, I think some of those life choices aren't just a woman's life choice, it's a family life choice, and part of that is determined by who's the higher income earner. So when you get to the point, I mean, look, I had my kids in my 20s, but more people are having them in their 30s and later. You make a decision as a family about who's got the earning power. Now, in a lot of families, the male partner in those relationships, if it's a male-female relationship, is often earning more. So the life choice they're making is based on who's bringing more in. But this goes back to the fact that I believe that we still have a huge amount of job segregation when it comes to gender.
So hang on. You're making an assumption.
No, can I finish my point?
You're making an assumption that this
is
based on some sort of...
No, I hadn't finished what I was going to say. I think a lot of jobs that are high-income jobs, engineers, for example, we have hardly any women and girls in that area, and we need to have that in there. Often in school, the choices that are put in front of girls are for the less-paid jobs and professions. If you look at the number of women... Hang on. If you look at the number of women who work in health and social care compared to men, it is much higher, and there's often a low value and a pay value.
Should we be advertising those to men?
So what I think is the way to address this,
some professions are over.
I think the way to address this is about tackling the way in which boys and girls are encouraged to go in certain jobs. I would actually say that actually one of our problems in our schools is what we're seeing is actually working class kids less likely to end up in the higher paying professions. That worries me an awful lot, and that's where I do think working class boys are often losing out. But there is also,
not really a class issue.
It's the payover.
You're making an
part
assumption
of the class issue that you don't get into the jobs that pay the highest paid wages.
Well, let Milo come out. So, I mean, Milo, one of the things you do mention, which is talked about a lot, is that girls are outperforming boys at school.
Right.
More of them are going to university. Employers prefer them. This is anecdotal,
yes.
I have to say. You know,
no,
they're
it's
more
not
driven.
anecdotal. Actually, there are studies now.
Even if
3 weeks ago, a study came out that showed that men and women going for the same job with the same qualification in STEM fields, the women are 3 to 1 more likely to get the job, because it's a generational thing. You know, it's happening very, very recently. In the last 5 years, a lot of stuff has happened very, very fast.
Right, George, what do you think? Do you think at the moment that there is beginning to be a turnaround, that actually, despite the pay issue, which we can agree to disagree on, that actually men are still paid more than women for the same or very similar jobs in a lot of cases?
It's just not
according
true.
To the statistic.
Well, it's a feminist myth that will not die.
But are men now feeling the pressure?
In more detail with us is Natasha Devon, founder of the Self-Esteem Team, a campaign group that works with teenagers on mental health and body image, and writer and broadcaster and mischief maker, Milo Yian. Let's see how we get on today. It's great to see you, Natasha. Congratulations on the MBE, by the way. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. You presumably, I'm sure you welcome the decision. What impact might it have?
I think body image, the more I learn about it, the more complicated I realise it is. And things like mannequins and adverts, they're symbols, really, I think, more than anything, of the pressures that women face. So Topshop's decision is a victory, but it's not going to change. It's not going to change anything significant, I don't think.
Why not?
Because it runs so deep, it's in the very fabric of our society, and that's why we go into schools and work on changing mindsets and giving young people the armour they need to question capitalism, because it's in the very fabric of the world that we live in. A mannequin, it might shock you out of your revelry, and that's certainly what's happened with this campaign, but this stuff is all around us all the time.
Well, it's extraordinary, isn't it, to hear about, you know, the fact that there's apparently a problem with women worrying about being too thin. That's, of course, not the problem. The problem is that everyone's getting too fat. And actually, there's no evidence, really, that any of this stuff has much of an impact. A lot of the science is very fuzzy on this. It's social science stuff rather than any real sort of reports or anything. I mean, what worries me about all of this kind of stuff is the implication that somehow we're going to make people's lives happier or better by encouraging them to believe that whatever body shape they are and whatever they look like, they're beautiful and they're going to be happy. That's evident. That's quite clearly not the case. I mean, if you look at women's happiness has been going down since the Second World War. Actually, every decade, women are getting more miserable as they get told that they can be who they want and look how they like. And you can say, I suppose, that a woman's self-esteem should have nothing to do with whether or not a man's sexual preference, you know, sort of coincides with how she looks. But the fact is, women are getting more unhappy, and this sort of slightly irresponsible trend to sort of encourage people to eat whatever they want and do whatever they want is is one of the things that's fueling an obesity crisis. And that's eat whatever they want and do whatever they want is one of the things that's fueling an obesity crisis. And that's eat whatever they want and do whatever they want is one of the things that's fueling an obesity crisis. And that's a really serious thing. That's a real thing. That's something that's got health implications, it's got cost implications for the NHS. The problem isn't too many anorexic women. The problem is quite in the opposite direction. We're perfectly happy to have aspirational role models in our entertainment. We should have them too in our retail. There's nothing wrong with encouraging people to live healthily.
There's so much wrong with what you just said. First of all, the message is not eat whatever you want, sit on your sofa and eat lard all day. The message is live a healthy lifestyle and then see how your body ends up. There's quite a wide spectrum within which the human body can exist and be healthy. Human beings come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and that should be reflected in retail, because after all, it's us that's spending our money on those clothes. There's also evidence to show that our thin worshipping culture is actually what's fueling the obesity crisis, that it makes people feel shameful, that it makes people eat more, it makes people feel excluded from the world of health. I was recently in Copenhagen, a place where they are obsessed with health in a very positive way, and the mannequins, I noticed, were a little larger. So why not allow people the freedom to see themselves reflected in shop windows?
I don't think that anybody's complaining about, having realistic types if they want them in certain places. The problem is when you start sort of bullying retailers into getting rid of aspirational body types, making clothes look worse in the window. I mean, if you look, when a woman goes shopping, for example, she quite often looks at clothes that are a smaller size than she'll actually wear, because she wants to know how that garment's actually going to look. When a woman goes shopping, for example, she quite often looks at clothes that are a smaller size than she'll actually wear, because she wants to know how that garment's actually going to look. When a woman goes shopping, for example, she quite often looks at clothes that are a smaller size than she'll actually wear, because she wants to know how that garment's actually going to look. These sorts of aspirational...
Not sure that's true, but go on.
Well, I love how we're being told what women look for when they go shopping.
This is obviously from the sort of mansplaining school of feminism, which of course also hates capitalism, as we heard earlier. And there's always, you know, what I really don't like about this debate is it's a sort of women-on-women kind of violence. This isn't really about whether sort of heteropatriarchal, capitalistic sort of superstructure or weird atmosphere that is encouraging women to have unhealthy attitudes towards their bodies. What this is really about, unfortunately, very often, is older women who aren't very happy taking out their frustration on younger women and on youth culture. And if you look, unfortunately, at a lot of the activists who do this, the people who make the complaints, the journalists, the media figures who are doing this, very often they are older, very often they are single, very often they are taking out, you know, their frustrations in their own personal lives on brands that are aimed at 22-year-old girls who are much closer to the sorts of body shapes that we see in the windows.